There's something many people carry but rarely name, a weight they picked up so young they don't remember what life felt like without it. They weren't asked to carry it. They weren't prepared for it, but one day they looked around and realized no one else was going to handle things, so they did, and they've been handling things ever since. If you're someone who grew up too fast, you probably can't pinpoint the exact moment childhood ended. There was no ceremony, no announcement, no clear line. You just started noticing things other kids didn't notice, feeling responsible for things other kids didn't think about, acting older than you were because someone needed you to. And now, years later, you're an adult who functions beautifully on the outside, capable, responsible, reliable. But on the inside, there's a tiredness that never quite goes away. A sense that you've been running since you were small and you still don't know how to stop. So, what actually happens to a child who grows up too fast? What does it do to their brain, their relationships, their sense of self? And why does that early responsibility leave marks that last decades? Let's start with what psychologists call parentification. This is when a child takes on roles that should belong to an adult. Not just chores or helping out, but emotional regulation, caregiving, decision-making, keeping the family stable. There are two types. Instrumental parentification is when a child handles practical responsibilities like cooking, cleaning, managing money, taking care of siblings. Emotional parentification is when a child becomes the therapist, the peacekeeper, the one who manages everyone else's feelings. Both types force a child's brain to develop in ways it's not ready for. The prefrontal cortex, which handles planning and emotional regulation, gets pushed into overdrive. The child learns to suppress their own needs, read rooms for danger, anticipate problems before they happen. And here's what's crucial. This isn't growth, it's adaptation to threat. The child isn't becoming mature, they're becoming hypervigilant. Their nervous system is learning that safety depends on constant monitoring, constant responsibility, constant control. Here's what people who grew up too fast often experience. You were the one who made sure everyone ate, who kept things calm when adults were fighting, who comforted your siblings when no one comforted you, who learned to be small and helpful and never too much. You became fluent in reading micro-expressions. You could sense tension before it erupted. You knew which mood meant danger and which meant temporary safety. You developed an internal warning system that never turned off. And if anyone praised you for being mature, responsible, such an old soul, you smiled, because praise was the only acknowledgement you got. But inside, you weren't proud, you were exhausted, and you were still just a child. But why does growing up too fast leave such lasting effects? The research points to several key impacts. First, it creates what psychologists call role confusion. When a child acts as a parent, they lose the developmental space to learn how to be a child. They don't learn how to play without purpose, how to make mistakes without consequences, how to need things without shame, how to exist without being useful. These aren't small losses. These are fundamental building blocks of healthy identity. As adults, they struggle with rest, with pleasure, with receiving care. Because somewhere deep in their nervous system, they learned that being taken care of meant someone else wasn't, that their needs were a burden, that love had to be earned through service. Second, it impacts attachment patterns. Children who grow up too fast often develop anxious or avoidant attachment styles. They learned early that people are unreliable, that emotions are dangerous, that depending on someone means inevitable disappointment. So, they become either hypervigilant in relationships, constantly monitoring for signs of abandonment, or they become distant, never letting anyone close enough to hurt them. They want intimacy, but they've built walls so high they can't find the door. When someone tries to take care of them, they freeze. It feels wrong, uncomfortable, like a trap. Because vulnerability wasn't safe when they were small, so their nervous system still treats it as danger. Third, it creates chronic stress activation. When a child lives in a state of constant responsibility and vigilance, their stress response system never learns to rest. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis stays activated. Cortisol levels remain elevated. Years later, even when life is objectively safe, their body doesn't believe it. They feel anxious for no clear reason. They can't relax. They wake up already tired. They live with a background hum of dread that they can't explain and can't escape. Fourth, it distorts self-worth. Children who grew up too fast learned a devastating equation. My value equals my usefulness. If I'm not solving problems, managing emotions, or taking care of someone, I have no purpose. This creates adults who cannot sit still, who feel guilty for resting, who say yes when they mean no because saying no feels like abandonment, who give and give until they're empty, then feel ashamed for being empty. They're often described as selfless, giving, always there for others. But it's not generosity, it's a survival strategy. They're still that child trying to earn love by being indispensable. Let's talk about the different ways this shows up in adulthood. Some people become chronic overfunctioners. They anticipate everyone's needs. They solve problems no one asked them to solve. They manage, organize, and control because chaos feels like danger. They're the friend everyone calls in a crisis, the employee who takes on too much, the partner who does everything, and they're exhausted, but they don't know how to stop, because stopping feels like failing. Others become emotionally shut down. They learn that feelings were luxuries they couldn't afford, so they push them down so deep they can't access them anymore. They appear calm, stable, unbothered. Inside, they're numb. They don't cry, they don't ask for help, they don't admit when they're struggling, because they learned that emotional needs made them weak, burdensome, too much. So they cut themselves off from their own humanity to stay safe. Some develop perfectionism. If they could just be good enough, responsible enough, flawless enough, maybe they'd finally be allowed to rest. Maybe they'd finally be enough. But the goalpost keeps moving, because the problem was never their performance. It was a childhood that demanded performance instead of providing safety. And some develop a split self. There's the competent adult who functions in the world, and there's the frozen child still waiting for permission to be small, to be messy, to be held. These two parts never integrate, so they live in constant internal conflict. Here's what's particularly painful. People who grew up too fast often don't recognize their own trauma. They think trauma requires something dramatic: abuse, neglect, violence. They don't realize that being required to be an adult when you're still a child is traumatic. They minimize their experience. Other people had it worse. I had food and shelter. My parents did their best. And maybe all of that is true, but it's also true that you lost something essential. You lost the right to be a child, and that loss deserves acknowledgement. Research shows that adverse childhood experiences don't have to be violent to be damaging. Emotional neglect, chronic stress, and role reversal all impact brain development. They all teach the nervous system that the world isn't safe. They all leave marks. Here's something important. Healing doesn't mean forgetting your competence. It doesn't mean becoming helpless or dependent. It means learning that you're allowed to have needs. That rest isn't selfish, that other people can handle their own emotions, that you don't have to earn your place in someone's life. It means reparenting yourself, giving yourself the permission, the gentleness, the unconditional acceptance you didn't receive, telling the child inside you that they can finally stop trying so hard that they're enough just by existing. For people who didn't grow up too fast, this might seem abstract, but consider this. Imagine being 7 years old and responsible for whether your family falls apart. Imagine being 10 and unable to play because someone might need you. Imagine being 13 and already feeling like you've lived a full, exhausting life. That's not strength, that's survival, and it leaves scars that most people never see. If you're someone who grew up too fast, here's what you need to know. First, your hypervigilance isn't paranoia. It's a nervous system that learned to protect you when no one else did. It served you. It kept you safe. You can honor it while also teaching it that you're safe now. Second, your difficulty receiving care isn't coldness. It's a nervous system that learned that vulnerability equals danger. You can acknowledge that wound while slowly, carefully learning to let people in. Third, your exhaustion is real. You've been running since you were small. Your nervous system has been in overdrive for years. Rest isn't laziness. It's biological necessity. You're not weak for being tired. You're human. Fourth, your worth isn't tied to your productivity. You don't have to earn love. You don't have to be useful to deserve care. You are enough simply because you exist. That child inside you was always enough. They just weren't told. And finally, healing is possible. Not healing that erases what happened, but healing that lets you live differently, that lets you rest, that lets you need things. That lets you be imperfect and still worthy of love. Here's the truth. Growing up too fast doesn't make you broken. It makes you someone who survived something hard, someone who developed extraordinary strength because they had no choice. Someone who learned to carry weight most people never lift. But you don't have to carry it anymore. You can put it down. You can rest. You can be the person who needs instead of the person who provides. You can let yourself be imperfect, messy, human. You spent your childhood being the adult. You can spend your adulthood finally learning to be the child you never got to be, not by becoming helpless, but by allowing yourself softness, by believing you deserve care, by letting go of the idea that love must be earned. So if you grew up too fast, be gentle with yourself. You survived something that required you to become someone you weren't ready to be. You did what you had to do, and you're still here. But you don't have to keep running. You don't have to keep proving your worth. You don't have to keep carrying everyone else's weight. You can rest now. You can need things. You can take up space. You can be imperfect and still deserving of love. Because you always were. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.